Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel and another little tutorial on the amazing Empress Effects Zoia patchable modular synthesizer, where the only limitation is your imagination and the CPU, of course. Now, not long ago I created a few videos where just pieces of music that were played as a generative patch on the Zoia using a shift register. I'm going to link to that up here, one of them anyway. And I didn't explain that much how it works. Of course, it wasn't a tutorial, it was just a piece of music. So what is a shift register? Why is a shift register an interesting thing to use in generative music, and how do you make one? That's what I'm going to address in this video and demonstrate how to do, and I'm going to start from scratch. Now, first of all, just to explain very briefly, it will be more clear once I actually start patching it up. What is a shift register? Now, a shift register is, if you imagine that you have an array of values. So maybe I'll just point at these rows now. Imagine you have 8 values. And these 8 values, every time they get the order to move, to shift, all of them will shift one step to the right. So now the second value will be the same as the first value was, the previous tick, as it were, and etc. all the way along. And then every time it gets a new tick, an input telling it to shift, the values will move one step further along until the last value goes out of the system. And of course there's something that comes into it from this side that creates the value that is in this register. A shift register is one of the basic building blocks of computers, for instance. So how can we use this in generative music, and why is it a good thing to use in generative music? Right, so when you want to make a generative patch on the Zoia, I'm just going to show you now the most basic generative patch you can imagine on the Zoia, and that is you start with a random source. So I'm going to do, not a control module, random, and this is this one here. And what the random module does now, it gives a random value every tick of the Zoia's processor. So that's every 1.3 milliseconds. It will create a new value. And of course, the most basic way to use this for generative music is to patch it into an audio module, an oscillator. Let's make it a triangle wave. I'm just going to patch the random module into the input there now, and then we patch that to, let's see, interface module, audio output. I'll put on the gain control just in case I need that. I usually do that as a habit because I often use headphones with my patching. And then I'm just going to patch that into the audio output, and this is what we get. There you go, generative music. That's not the end of this tutorial, of course. Now, that's uncontrolled generative music. A next step on the way, I'll just remove the connection between the oscillator and the random module now. The next step on the way is, of course, to only get a new value sent to the oscillator every time interval that suits what you want. So in order to do this, we want something to keep time. So let's make an LFO now. So let's make an LFO. That should be quite close to the top here. And a square wave, because it's just going to, so now we got a square wave LFO that's ticking along here. And in order to take this value and only get a new one every tick of the LFO, we create a sample and hold. So that's another control module, sample and hold. And what a sample and hold does is it takes an input, and this could be, for instance, a random source now. I'm going to patch the random into the input. And every time it gets a trigger on the middle pad, the value that is at the input at that particular time is copied over to the output, and it remains there until the next time we get a trigger. And so we can patch the LFO here into the sample and hold, and that means that now every time the LFO ticks, it will copy the random value to the output here. Now we patch that into the oscillator and see what happens. Okay, so that's still quite wild and uncontrolled. So that's just a starting point, of course. This is still just really, really basic generative patching. I'm just going to move that a little bit out of the way, just to move the oscillator over there. Let's move it down there, actually. So what else can we do to make this more interesting? Well, another step that we might think of doing when we do generative music is to add a quantizer, because we want these notes to be in a certain key, for instance. So, and of course, with the recent update, the quantizer module now has more scale. So I'm going to go into control modules again and select quantizer. And we want to put scale and key jacks on. And we put scales extended, which means we get the full range of scales. If you do basic now on scales, that is the old quantizer module, which is just the minors and the major scale. And if you do extended, you get all kinds of additional scales. So I'm going to do done. I'm going to put this up there. So I'm going to remove the sample and hold patch from the random there, and I'm going to patch the random module into our quantizer. And then I'm going to set the key to, let's not keeping it A as it's set here, and I want a something that usually sounds very good regardless of the order of the notes is a pentatonic scale. Let's see if I can find it here now. Minor pentatonic, that's one of my favorites for improvisation. So now I've got a quantized output that is an A pentatonic minor scale, and so A minor pentatonic. I'm patching that into the sample and hold now, and let's see what that sounds like. Well, it sounds better because at least now all the notes are in the same key. But it still is quite some really bright notes there. They're not that musically useful. So very often when you do a generative sequence, you want to reduce certainly the input that you start with to within a few octaves. And of course, initially, the values of a random module now, if you patch it straight into an oscillator, will give us the full 10 octaves of pitches. So let's say we want to reduce that to 3 octaves, or maybe even 2. So what we can do is we can patch the random module into the quantizer, but we reduce the connection strength. So I'm going to reduce it now to, let's start with 30% maybe. And let's see what happens. It's getting better already. Now maybe we want to have our lowest note be a little bit higher, actually. So we go to the oscillator and we set a little offset there. So I'm going to let's just listen to it while we do this. Something like that, perhaps. Okay, so now we're coming along a little bit. So now we've got a quantized output. We've got, but still it's very random, isn't it? So how do you make it less random? How do you create patterns? And this is where we're getting closer to the idea of the shift register now, because if you want to do multi-timbral, multi-part generative music, let's say now I wanted to do several oscillators at the same time. So there are different ways you can do this. You can have them, of course, take the same input but with different offsets, so you create chords. But what if you want to let them play something that where the relationship between the different notes will also sound like it is being generated, like there is a variety there that is I'm just going to make that a sawtooth. Actually, I'm not going to do different just going to do different waveforms a little bit as well now. And I'm going to remove that offset I created on the first oscillator, because now that wouldn't be in key with the others. I'm going to create a value module here that creates the basic offset to set the minimum note value. So I'm going to create value there, and I'm going to patch that into all of the oscillators and set that to 0.1. That's 1 octave up. Maybe it doesn't really matter so much what you set it to. And of course, still now there's only one of the oscillators that have been patched up. Now, of course, one thing you could do now is to patch the same output here to all of them, for instance. I'm just going to do that now, and I'm going to have 2 of them on the left and 2 on the right, just so you can hear which oscillators are which now. So I'm going to do like so. So now 2 of the oscillators are on the left, 2 are on the right, but they're still playing the same notes. But of course you can create different offsets for these. So if I add another value module, just to have full control of this now, and I'm just going to do like so, and I'm going to patch that into the second and third one now, and give them an offset of, let's see, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 semitones. So create a fifth. But they're still moving in parallel, so it's not that exciting, even though it is getting somewhere. So what you can do then is to create a shift register and then give different parts of the shift register notes, send the note values to the different oscillators. So I'm going to add another sample and hold here. Let's see, like so, and another one here, and another one here. Now, I want all of these sample and holds to be triggered by the same. Where's my LFO now? Where did I put there? The LFO. So I'm going to give. So that's going to trigger all of the sample and holds, but each new one is going to get its output from the previous one. So like so. And what this does now is this is already now a shift register. So when the first trigger is sent to the first sample and hold now, it gets the value from the random module, but at the same time, the second sample and hold gets its value from the first sample and hold. The third sample and hold gets its value from the second sample and hold, etc. And now, if we are going to remove the patching from, so that the first sample and hold now only controls the first oscillator, second sample and hold controls the second oscillator, third sample and hold the third oscillator, and the fourth oscillator, like so. Let's see what happens. Now I've got that fifth offset as well. I'm just going to remove that. So now what happens is, of course, that you get something that is generative. It is random, but it creates its own pattern by playing the same note more than once on a different oscillator. And then, of course, you can do things to create a little bit more interest by changing the sound up or down, maybe by an octave for some of the oscillators. I'm just going to do that now. So I'm going to do create a minus 0.1 value module here. minus 0.1. I'm going to patch that into maybe the third one. Okay. Sine wave. Well, it's still a little bit full on, but of course now that is because none of these are going through a VCA with an ADSR envelope. So maybe I should add that too, just to while I'm at it now. So I'm going to add a VCA. I'm going to add 2 VCAs. So I'm going to move those over on the other side there, and then I'm going to add an ADSR envelope, or 2 of them actually. Let's see. I'm just going to put them on separate lines so that they don't overlap right now. So the VCA there will take the input from the first, let's say from the first 2 oscillators, the second VCA from the last 2 oscillators. I'm going to remove the direct links now between the output and the oscillators. And then I'm going to control the volume of these VCAs with the 2 ADSR envelopes. I'm patching the output of the ADSR into the VCA level control. The output of, I'm going to actually do an effect now. So I'm going to do an effect. I'm going to put in a plate reverb and send the first 2 oscillators to the left channel, the second 2 oscillators to the right channel, and then the output from the plate reverb goes to the left and right outputs of the audio output. And then in order to control the trigger the ADSRs, I'm going to take the LFO that's triggering everything else and put that on the input trigger pads of the ADSRs, so that now it sounds like this. It sounds much better once you have an envelope on the sound and it's not just full on as well. So now we actually have a generative shift register sequence where the same notes are played more than once, but by different oscillators and also with different panning as well. And it doesn't take much to make this sound less generated and more deliberate, because you are creating a pattern in the randomness right away. And of course, our human ears, of course, very well suited to finding patterns, will register this and think it is a kind of a deliberate melody right away. So, and this is just a starting point, of course. Once you've done this, and you have your basic generative shift register sequence, and there are many things you can do to, you can change, of course, the tempo, you can change the rhythm, you can change the range that these are supposed to, of the notes being generated. You can create a probability that each of these steps are going to be played at any point. You also don't have to have a completely random source be the starting point of the whole sequence either. For instance, you can use, I can just demonstrate that now. So this is, I'm just going to, actually I'm going to move that just over on page 3 now, and I'll move the quantizer as well. And then I'm going to create a switch so I can switch between 2 different things. Let's see, so I'm going to do an in switch with 2 inputs. And so one of the inputs is going to be the random source, and another input is going to be an LFO. So I'm going to just to demonstrate now. So I'm going to do a triangle LFO, and at the moment this one is now connected to the quantizer, but I'm going to remove that connection and add the quantizer to the output of the switch, and also make that down to 30%. This LFO is going to be channel 2 of this in switch, and the control of the in switch I'm going to do with a button. So I'm going to create an interface module and a push button, and I'm going to make it latching, so on and off, and then I'm going to use that as a control for the channel here of the switch, so that now I can switch between the random input and the LFO, controlling which note is being generated that goes into the first shift register slot. So now it's random. And now it's the LFO. Because now the tempo is almost synced with the... I'll do it even slower now. We'll follow the LFO. The faster it goes, the more it will sound like a random source. Do it really fast. It may as well be random, but it still is going to be a pattern to the randomness. That's here. 66 beats per minute is our original. I'm just going to increase that to 100. I'm going to make this about 200. Now it stops almost because it's on half. They're almost in phase. And now it is still generative in a way, but you're creating more patterns within the patterns of this now. And now back to the random. It's not a huge difference, but you can hear there's a pattern in the one that's controlled by the LFO now. So that's just a few ideas to get you started on things you can do with a generative sequence based on a shift register. So this is, of course, there's many ways to make generative music if you want just one sound source. Of course, then there are other ways to create patterns and rhythms, etc. But this is a very great way to create generative music that is polyphonic generative music when you have more than one part playing at the same time. And that really is what I wanted to show you today. So the basic principles of using a shift register for generative music. And I hope that was all clear, and I hope I demonstrated the things that you needed to see to understand this. If you have any questions, of course, please feel free to ask in the comments. I think all that remains for me to say is thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful or interesting, or something that gets your creative juices flowing for doing your own patching, as well as maybe some musical ideas for how you can use this in your music. Another thing, of course, is that the sound output here doesn't have to be internal oscillators on the Zoia. Imagine that you can take these out on MIDI, for instance, and use this shift register to create MIDI notes that are played by different sound sources in your setup. So there's many ways you can use this as a starting point and as a generative sequencer for your Eurorack or for your other synthesizers. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. And yeah, until then, goodbye.